got into this, and I didn't really know anything about qualitative research. And Stephanie is a very good friend of mine. She's the associate dean of the business school, and she says, we were having dinner one night. She said, "Oh, I love doing qualitative research. I'll help." I'm like, "Great!" And we got Damon Hall from the Sustainability Solutions Initiative on campus. He's a postdoc. He does a lot of qualitative work. He said, "I'd really like to help with this. This will be great." And James, my colleague at the University of Maine, and she's done some work with this. So my first lesson to you, or my first piece of advice to you, is if you want to do something like this, find some people to work with you that know what you're doing, and it'll all work. As Anita said, this was funded through our Board of Trustees. Every year the system has one position that they fill. Normally it's for somebody that has gotten too many grants and they can't get their grants done, and so it's sort of a way that the Board of Trustees bless them to have some relief time from teaching, and they backfill for that teaching program. I actually proposed to do something which they were so excited about. They said, "Sure, we'll pick you." So we chose to do this. And what I wanted to do with them was, what we proposed to them was to do what was really essentially a major extension needs assessment for the future. And we've been thinking about, we've been in a lot of discussions with people, and they thought that if we proposed to do this, it would be a really good idea. We initially said that we would go out and do about 7 focus groups, and once we got started, a lot more people wanted us to come and meet with their groups. And it's quite an intensive operation to do this, so it ended up taking a lot more time than we expected. But in total, we really met with about almost 200 people that are actively involved in agriculture, which wasn't too bad. A lot of my colleagues came up to me and said, "Well, why would you really want to do this? Why don't you just go survey all these growers and ask them some specific questions? Wouldn't that be a whole lot easier?" And in some ways, perhaps it would have been easier. I'll grant you that. But what you get out of this, and what we hoped we would get out of this, are some key quotes that my intention is to take to our ag committee, to take to decision makers across the state and say, this is what our farming community wants for their future. This is what they see. Let's make it happen, because they really want to do this. The other thing that's kind of neat is in getting people around a table to talk about their future, I'm doing a on-farm trial this summer with this couple. This guy's wife just passed away, and I saw it in the newspaper, and because I knew him and I met him, I was able to send him a condolence note. It really does build community, and they like to get together, they like to talk about their future, and there aren't a lot of opportunities to do that in a sort of formal, structured way, and so I found that they really did enjoy doing it. So we did 4 mixed farmer sessions, and then we met with basically every commodity group that we have in the state. So we met with like the potato industry, the blueberry industry, vegetable industry, the dairy industry. We met with some young farmers from Mach, really the whole gamut. And this last group here is the Maine Landscape and Nursery Association. We met with the people that grow the plants only, not the people that really sell it. So that's who we met with. And distributionally wise, we really covered the state. And I know there aren't 199 dots there, but a lot of people came from the same town. So these are just the towns where people were represented across the state. So I think we got a good cross section. I think we have the basis for some really good numbers here. And so one thing that was kind of fun, we got a chunk of money from the Board of Trustees to do this, and in doing this, we had 178 of our 199 people actually filled out demographic information. Farmers aren't real long to do that because they think you're going to come back and pester them. But we were then able to figure out how many miles they traveled to come to these sessions and how much time we devoted to it. And in extension, in Maine, we give about $16 an hour for somebody's volunteer time. And so we were actually able to go back to the Board of Trustees and say, not only did you give us this amount of money, but our growers really invested this amount of time and energy into the program. So it was really money well spent. Some of the days that we traveled, we got to see a lot of beauty of Maine and the Maine landscape. A lot of days were not. And it just happened that I was teaching last winter when I was doing this work, and the only day I could do this was on Wednesday. And I don't know if you remember last winter, but it rained, it snowed every Wednesday. And if I was on the road, it was going to snow. And we had lots and lots with a lot of snow. And I thought the half-mast flags was about kind of appropriate for that. The other thing we tried to do was to try to get younger farmers into this discussion session. I was afraid that I both wanted, they are our future, they are engaged actively in the process, so I thought we really wanted to try to skew the population this way as much as possible. So what I did was I would go to the industries and I would say, can I get a list of farmers, and we would invite them. We sort of had it where we welcomed anybody to come in and join the conversation, but we were hoping to try to skew it to younger people. And if they knew some people, so they would give us a name, and if they wanted to come, then we asked them in sort of a snowball way of getting our participants to come to the session. And overall, I think we did end up getting a good cross-section. I should explain the crop advisors group. I do a program in Portsmouth every year for certified crop advisors, and I thought it would be really interesting to get them to talk about what they hear their farmers saying. So some of this, we do get more of a regional influence with some of their comments in the project. You'll notice that they are not a equally distributed age group. They tend to be a little older, but so that's where that comes from. And it was funny because I've been meeting with this group for about 16 years, and I kind of thought they would enjoy sitting around and talking about what farmers think about, and they primarily think I'm supposed to be there to talk to them, not them to talk to me. So one of them said, "I can't believe, Jemison, you've gone Oprah on us." So that was kind of amusing. We also really wanted to try to get more women into this conversation. And as we look at some of particularly the younger farmers coming in, a lot of them are women, and we really wanted their voices in here. And so I think we did a fairly decent job getting some of that, getting their voices into this project. I hope so, anyway. So then you got to figure out, okay, what are we going to ask these people? You know, this is our opportunity. What are we going to ask them? And so I brought groups of people together and sat around the table and said, okay, if you were going to talk to farmers, what would you like to ask them? What would you like to know as they think about their future? And so then I got their inputs, and then I sent these questions out to the different commodity groups, and I said, are these the right questions to ask? And they said, predominantly yes. So this is what we went with. One piece was, why do you farm? That was sort of the icebreaker, and we got some great comments out of that. What are you optimistic and pessimistic about as you look to the future? What kinds of changes do you think we need to make on the farms, or are you making on your farms with respect to fluctuating weather patterns and fluctuating energy prices? What kind of changes do you think we need to grow Maine agriculture? Where are you getting your information, and how do you see that changing as you move to the future? What's your vision of the future, and what do you think is our capacity and will be our capacity to feed Maine and for a more regional food system? So these, and then a final question was like, what else should we be asking? That's primarily what we're going to work from today. So I'll give you a little bit of background today on our research methods, how we went about doing this, kind of what groups were similar and different, and then talk about what's working well for Maine, what we've heard from our farmers is really positive, and then we'll move into what's their vision, and then look at some of the obstacles that they see to reaching their vision, and then look at what they talked about to grow Maine agriculture, and then I'll and I'll finish this with sort of more of a food systems kind of perspective on sort of where we go from what they've talked about. So in doing this, we taped the sessions, and with a nice little tape recorder, and then I had a student working with me last summer that transcribed them into Word files, and then we put these Word files into this in vivo program, and we coded the conversations into sort of positives and negatives, and then subgroups under those. And then this software package will actually do some correlational analysis to help you look to see what kind of groups were similar, what groups were different. It's a really interesting software package. I've just really scratched the surface with it myself, but it will do some really, really interesting things along the way. And so what we were able to do was to get, so basically we asked the computer program to tell us what groups were similar based on the word choices that they used, and it broke it into basically 3 clusters, and I'll talk about those clusters now. So the first cluster was really the apples, the Maine Landscape and Nursery Association, beef producers, and blueberries. And initially you think about that group and you think, wow, that's a weird kind of collection to seem like they're talking similarly. But when you begin to think a little more about it, apples and blueberries are real important. Labor is a real important issue for them. And they talked a lot about labor issues and the H-2A program and the difficulties of getting quality labor. And actually the Landscape and Nursery Association also talked a lot about that, because it's really hard to get people that know how to plant the plants well and are dependable and get there and all that kind of stuff. And then the other thing that this group really talked a lot about was climate change. And if you're a fruit grower and all of your profits are hanging out there, dangling on the end of the little branches out there, you can imagine that that's a concern to you. And so they spent a lot of time talking about that. And beef producers were funny because they kind of, in my mind, they kind of get half the program. They kind of get half the issue. They were talking a lot about that they're taking this beat up potato ground in Rusty County, putting it into forages, they're sequestering carbon, and they are. But there's also sort of the methane issue that they kind of gloss over. So that was kind of an interesting thing. But we talked a lot about that. And these tend to be a lot of multi-generational farmers. Our second group was kind of were the mixed farmer groups that got together. They tended to be the smaller farmers in acreage-wise. Most of them were organic. We had so this is our the first group we worked with was my town's farmers market group, because they are I know them and I could lean on them because I buy a lot of food from them, and so I got them together. And so these guys were primarily interested in and talked a lot about the role of food and health. We had the chance to work with the Mach Indian Nation, and I was really fortunate to get to meet with them. And they have a 12-acre farm that's located between Caribou and Presque Isle, and they've been growing their agricultural interest around that in hopes of producing and providing better food for the people. So that was a really big thing for them. And these guys tended to talk a lot about healthcare and some land access issues along the way. Our third group tended to be the commodity growers. They were the crop advisor groups. Interestingly, so we had potatoes and dairy and the vegetable growers in this particular group. They spent a lot of time talking about how a lot of efforts, they tended to be, a lot of their conversations tend to be a bit more on the negative side. They were complaining that there's too many roadblocks with respect to technology, and if they can't have these technologies, then they can't compete against their neighbors, and so they're kind of angry about some of that stuff. They were concerned about loss of support, an aging population, farm succession issues, and things like that. And a lot of them really talked about how the public doesn't understand what they do, and that extension ought to be out there telling the public the value of what they do. And so that was some of what they were talking about. So really interesting diversity in these conversations. The first thing so really looking at what farmers said was really going well, every single group brought up the whole buy local concept as a really important thing. And in terms of all of the optimistic comments, a third of them that we coded in were all around this buy local issue. And anything we can do to promote it, to get people encouraged about it, they thought that's what Extension ought to be doing. And from the potato growers up to everybody. And so, in essence, this is the kinds of comments, and this is the first of a lot of comments that I've captured from their discussions that I hope, as I take them out to people, these kinds of comments will ring true to them. And the first one was, can we set a goal of 50% of Maine food being produced by Maine people in 10 years and identify the steps to reach that goal? Now, I'm not sure how much New Hampshire, I don't know what the New Hampshire percentage is, but 7%
right now.
Good, there we go. So you all have a little farther road to hoe than we do. We're closer to 20, and that's what we have been saying through the years. And you can get 10% almost just through milk and potatoes. So we are doing a little bit better than that. So, but at least it gives us a point of reference that we need to be increasing what we eat by. Well, they'd like to see us increasing by like 150%. So I think that's a pretty good goal. Another thing that they talked about was, as our strength and our real ace in the hole, is this great land and water resource base. And I hope sometime you will have a chance to meet with Tim Griffin, because he's down at Tufts, and he used to be my colleague in my office with me, and he's been looking at this whole issue of a regional food system, and can we make a go of this, and can we make it work? And so they see our big land and water resource base as our ace in the hole to get us there, and that we do have the capacity to feed our people, and we can use the rest of New England and Canada as our market base. And so I think they think we're pretty well positioned to grow, and they think it's a positive thing to do. So an example of a quote from a blueberry grower was, every time I listen to the news and hear about global issues, the lack of water, essential resources like that, I realize that Maine is sitting in this great place for everything agriculturally speaking. I think the potential is awesome. So I think that's pretty cool. And another one was that Maine actually has the capacity to feed its 1.3 million residents with the land base we have in the state, and we can actually provide them with a nutritionally balanced diet. So that's very optimistic. So I think our farmers are realizing that we need a better diet. We need to be producing more quality food for people, and that's what they would like to see us be moving in that direction. And again, a lot of people are continuing to be interested in this, like the Micmacs. The Micmac Indian Nation was really seeing this as a potential for economic development for their nation, and the health issues. And we went up and visited their farm in the summertime, and they have just built this really interesting, big, fairly good-sized building where they're selling some of their wares here in the front, but as you go down the sides of the building, they put farmers markets in there during the week and on the weekends, and then they have just built this big community kitchen in the back where they're teaching their members how to cook and how to utilize these vegetables that they're producing. So I think that's a really good model, and one that I think will make some inroads to improve the health situation for their nation. And I think the other real positive was that our farmers really do want to lead this change. They really do. They want to be there and guide this guide this process through. And I think that's really good, because I think if we can reach them with understanding the connection with land use and water quality, that they will, if they're leading it and they understand that, they'll lead it in a right direction. And I really enjoyed this quote that said, we need to be looking at how we're going to feed ourselves. And part of my reason for moving here was that Maine was poised to be able to do just that, more easily than most places in the country. So we have a magnificent opportunity to lead. So I'm really excited about the leadership component in this that we heard from our farmers. And lastly, I don't know if you all have ever been up to Mach and been around some of the, come up to the fair, and if you haven't, I recommend it. We really do have an amazingly supportive farming community. And to have worked on this project with Stephanie, who's a business professor, you know, she was just fascinated at the discussions of that it's such a different business model. And this whole process for me, one of the things that just really hit me like a 2x4 in the head was that for 25 years or 27 years, agriculture for me has been about science. And so we go to people about trying to teach them the science to make these changes. And what I've really come out of this whole project is that agriculture is a business. It's a business first, it's a business second, it's a business third. And somewhere down the road, they kind of process the science part of this. And so somehow as we do our work and we're working with these guys, we really need to keep that in mind. But interestingly, it's this really unique view of business that is so unlike any other industry that Stephanie's worked with. And what they talked about were things like, you know, I'm really optimistic about our strong network of farmers. I don't think I could think of a more supportive place to be a young farmer, was one quote that we heard. And a second one was that when we want to see one another succeed. If something is working, we talk about it. We don't keep our information under our hat. So they're not trying to say, they're not necessarily trying to find their little niche and keep it under the niche. What they want to see is agriculture grow, create markets, create opportunities so we can bring young people onto the land and grow and have them be able to make a living. And there's, you know, there are a lot of challenges with doing that if we can't grow the industry. So those were the positives that we really heard from our farmers. And now, if we think about sort of the vision of agriculture, it was interesting when we got to this question that everybody said, well, do you want what we think is going to happen, or do you want what we want to have happen? And we sort of kind of said, well, we hadn't thought about that. How about both? So what you're going to hear is kind of the both situation. And not real surprising to anybody that's interested in agriculture. The farmers pretty much believe that bigger farmers are going to have to get bigger and smaller farmers are going to have to get more intensive and diversified. That wasn't a big shock to anybody, but it does pose some challenges for us in our interactions with farmers. Because if we're going to have this sort of bifurcating industry, how do we reach and how do we work with them? And, you know, I think about our dairy farms, and, you know, we think a lot of our dairy farms are going to continue to get bigger, they're going to get more intensified, they're going to make energy off of the byproducts, and this sort of thing is probably going to continue to happen, and they do it primarily, of course, for economies of scale, but they fully expect that that's going to happen. But the challenge for us is then if we're going to try to meet these larger growers' needs with applied research, I don't know about you all, but our agronomy farm, we're driving around with a small tractor and a 4-row planter that's John Deere from 1962 or something, and we're always trying to figure out how to keep it running. And that's just not going to work for these guys. So we're going to have to figure out how to take advantage of the technologies that they have and lay out big trials and be able to work with them in those kinds of ways. And it does pose some challenges for us as we look to the future. I think our small farms are, you know, this is where I think there's the most young optimism. I think a lot of young people want to come in, they want to do this. It's gonna, for these folks to be successful, they're gonna have to be intensive, and the success of this really is in connections and making personal relationships with people, so that these people that are buying their food are connecting to them and they realize what their money's going to and who they're supporting. And it's funny when we work with some younger students and they're like, well, I just want to get in farming because I don't really like to deal with people. Well, if you're 80,000 acre apple farmer, you can probably do that. But if you're going to be a small farmer, you're going to have to do this. And we need to be teaching these young people marketing skills, and really selling their product and how to sell their product to make it really work. And they're going to have to be nimble, they're going to have to be diversified, and they're going to have to work like really hard. It's not an easy way to go. But when some of the people's vision were, like, I see a future of Maine with lots of small 2, 3, 4, 5 acre farms with intensive production, selling retail, perhaps exporting food to Massachusetts and Point 7. And I think that we heard in a number of times. And I think the research that we're doing for these people, I think, in this audience, has been really interesting. This is Eric Gallant. You're going to have the opportunity to see his wife in a couple of weeks. And Eric's a weed ecologist, and he's been trying to study and develop these interesting tools that farmers can do to really increase their efficiency. Because the one thing small farms are going to need to do is be able to do things quickly, effectively, with less energy and less physical energy, because when you're that age, you think you can do that for a long time. Let me tell you, it can't. I know. So the other thing is that we heard a lot about, and particularly from the smaller groups, is that they want more information about livestock-powered agriculture. And this is a real shock. I mean, I did not expect to hear this. And we went out on some farms, and these people, some of the farmers talked about hay burners. That these guys are hay burners instead of oil burners, and that over the long term that they think there's going to be some future here. And they talk a lot about, we heard from them that they like the connection with the animals, they like the pace, and there's some really interesting older Wendell Berry articles that would really reflect what these folks have been talking about. So pretty neat stuff. In your neck of the woods, Charlie, there's going to be more food value added. It's going to be a real key to what our farmers see in their future. Future of agriculture should definitely focus on value added processing opportunities. So anything we can do to create opportunities to get these, when they have excess, into value added means they see as a real positive for their future. So what are the obstacles? There's got to be some obstacles out there to farmers, and we had one farmers market in Maine in 1971, and we have tons of farmers markets across the state today, and while that's good, it's also a problem because these mature markets, there's only so many vegetable growers that can come into direct marketing, farmers market opportunities. And so almost every group said we've got to figure out new ways to grow this industry, to get the food into institutions. We have a law in Maine that says that if you're receiving state funds, you need to have 10% of your food come from local sources. But they can get that through milk, almost through just buying local milk. So that's not really good. So when I talked to the ag legislator, I was like, maybe y'all ought to be thinking about kind of ramping that number up and seeing what we can do to get more opportunities into institutions. So that could be an opportunity. The lack and or loss of infrastructure has been a real problem throughout a lot of New England, and we heard many comments about this. So we're going to need to do something about that. And a quote, for example, was we've lost a lot of infrastructure, we've lost our grist mills, our processing plants, and we've lost a lot of it. So it's going to take a lot of work to get that back. And it is. So, if we're looking at the future and we're seeing a need to build this regional food system, this is a really good place to start. And another quote was, interest in local food production could lead to a realization that we need to do something different. And we have 15 years to build up the infrastructure and to make some societal changes that could lead farmers to prospering and more people enjoying local food. And it was interesting that they kind of put it in this time frame, because that's the time frame that we were looking at. And I think it's also a time frame that we're going to see these kinds of changes coming and happening that are going to be particularly difficult to deal with. So that was an interesting piece as well. I bet you all would be shocked if I told you that farmers don't like regulation. I'm sure. You're just shocked, aren't you? I knew it. So I tried to find two of the comments that were sort of progressive or thoughtful comments about regulations, and ones that I could actually use in public. And this one of our farmers said, look, we just need straightforward regulations that anybody can read, written at a 6th grade reading level, so they can only be interpreted one way. And when I talked to the Ag Committee, this is one of the things I brought up to them, because this is so important, because people are going to make investments on their farm, and they think they want to do chickens, and they want to do on-farm processing and chickens. You can't have some regulator change regulators, and the new one comes in and says, I think this is wrong. You know, we have to have it specific enough that these people can make investments and do this work on their farms and do it safely and have it work. So I think that's a real important one. And one other one was, regulations don't really bother me. It's when they don't make sense for all of us at the scales we're at. So why can't we develop some scale-specific regulations that help farmers and protect food safety and that sort of thing, so that we can make this industry work? And I think we can. I don't know what we're going to do about this particular one, because every time I look around, we're getting smaller, and you know, most of us are getting grayer, and we're not bringing a lot of young people in. Although, here in New Hampshire, somehow you found oil underneath this granite or something, and you all have done this great young people hire, and I'm thrilled for you. But up in our part of the world, we have only lost ground so far, and the industry is very concerned about, you know, are we going to have people there to repair the parlors when something breaks down? Are we going to have the educational support as we look to the future, and how do we keep it going? Because they're going to need it, and it is an obstacle. And we heard from a lot of people that it really is difficult to get access and get money to get access on to start farming. And I gave a presentation at our Ag Trade Show on this, and I was challenged by the head of FSA. He said, look, John, we're giving money out every day. All they have to do is come in and ask for it. But I think it's the conditions and the interest rates and other issues that are sort of buried into this particular thing that they're talking about. And you know, and so I also went out and gave this to a couple of our farmer groups to sort of say, okay, we got this information from you, and I'm going to bring it back to you, and this is our feedback mechanism. And if what I'm saying to you isn't ringing true, we need to know about this, because this is what we're going to go out and take out to the people. And they said, for the most part, yes, what we said was true, but they thought in some ways we might have been a tad bit optimistic. And one person was saying, look, can we really afford to farm? And I had one farmer say, look, John, you know, we work 365 days a year. We had no vacation. We got no sick leave. We got no retirement program, and we're just barely getting by. So we need to change this. And so I said, well, you know, so what do you think is the problem? And he said the problem is the cheap food policy that we have in this country, and this is what, if you all can work and educate your students up there we have to get out and we have to change the food policy. And he really sees that as essential. And another one of our growers that in the same meeting said, look, for years we've been the bottom of the food chain, bottom feeders of the food system. We should be the top. And they are producing really great quality stuff, and it's stuff that we need to take home and prepare, and I think there's part of the problem as well. So so that was sort of the other side of the coin as we went through that. So I told him, I said, I'll put that in there. So if we are going to grow a regional food system, and where Maine's going to be a big part of it, how are we going to do it? And I think it's basically, we can just look at what our growers talked about, and if we focus on those as the starting points, we'll get there. And one of the things that we heard was that we've got this problem that our big farms are going to get bigger, our small farms are going out, and then we have these mid-sized farms that are really essentially becoming housing developments, you know, and we need some new arrangements. And they talked a little bit about, should we be exploring some new arrangements? And so could we take a 150, 200 acre farm and bring 2 or 3 vegetable growers in to produce vegetables on there, and run some animals on, and have another family running animals, some beef cows, and maybe we do some lambs and some chickens, and so that the outputs of these guys can become the inputs of these guys, and figure out some interesting systems that, because we also hear from a lot of these farmers that, you know, we've got kids, we got 2 or 3 kids, and we're trying to run this farm, and it's just really hard to do it all. And could there be some arrangements? And we heard this from farmers, and we brought it back to farmers, and they said, well, you know, it's not going to be easy, but a lot of them think this is going to have to be the future for some of these middle-sized farms. And that may not be the exact solution, of course, but that's just an example. Another thing that farmers really talked about was, how do we create access to capital other than going to FSA and getting a loan? So, you know, Russ, we put out a really interesting, we have the Margaret Chase Smith Policy Institute at Maine, and we put out a policy review every year, and this last one was on the food system. And you can get, if you search for that online, you can get it, and there are a lot of really interesting articles about our food system and different aspects of our food system. And in that, Russ said, we need the Ag Committee to propose a mechanism for a new farmer fund. You know, like if everybody could pony up $10 in the state, we could get a lot of young people on the farm. That was one of his ideas. And I gave this presentation at a extension office recently, and the county commissioner was there, and he's like, look, if we can subsidize wind to the tunes of millions of dollars, and we can do Efficiency Maine and have a $50 million fund to start, why can't we convince legislators in Augusta to set up a fund and have this fund be very available to young people that want to get into farming, and have them pay it back using a percentage of the food that they grow for people that are economically challenged? What could be so complicated about that? That was really interesting thinking, I think. Really, really a good idea. And so maybe we can. I hope we can. I think because it helps on so many different levels, because we've got to improve the diet. Improving the diet is expensive, so this might be one way to get there. And one of the last biggest issues for farmers is health insurance. And if you have a young family farm, a young family with 2 or 3 kids, and it's really hard for someone to work off the farm and have someone working on the farm, we have some issues. And probably my favorite quote of the whole group that we had was this one. And this woman said, look, health insurance is a real kicker. For most of us at farm, we have what I call a ticket. Something that we have that makes it so that we can farm. My ticket is a husband who works off the farm completely. Some people's ticket is an inheritance to buy a farm, or parents have helped them buy a farm. You don't need a ticket to become a biologist or an office assistant, but you need a ticket pretty much right now in Maine to farm. And that's unacceptable if we want agriculture to grow and encourage younger generations. Pretty powerful. And so I know at the University of Maine system, we are too old for any insurance company to want to fund us, to insure us. So we are self-insured, and we have some company that processes our insurance for us. Farmers, there have got to be at least as many farmers in Maine as we have in the University of Maine system. So if you would think that we could come up with sort of a single payer system for farmers, so that they could buy into a system and be able to have affordable health care. I would like to think we could. And if we don't, it's going to be really hard to grow the food system. That was a real key piece. Another real key idea that we had from our farmers was this. This one lady said, look, we have over 29, and it's actually more like $31 million a month coming into the state of Maine for food stamps right now every month. And that's a hell of a lot of money. And if even 1% of that come back into local farming, what a benefit that would be. And right now we don't have 1%. We are not capturing 1% of that. Back before they went to EBT cards, we did capture about 1% of it, and then it dropped way down for years because we couldn't use them at the farmers markets, and now it's just starting to come back up again. But that's a ton of money, and if we could, if we can get them, but there are a lot of hurdles in that. First of all, you have to convince these people that they want this food, that this food is beneficial to them, and then they have to know what to do with it when they get home, because it's not like something you take out of the freezer and go put in the microwave. So there are some issues here, but if we can tap into this and get 1%, 2%, 3% of this coming into direct hands of farmers, I think it'll really help us a lot. And again, we need to get more food, local food, into institutions. So these are the key things that I think we really heard from our farmers, we think are really important. And I think there's tremendous economic opportunity for our state. We've had governors that come in and they're always out, fishing for that one big industry that they're going to bring into the state that's going to change our economy. And we've got a good economy. We have great potential here for steady, slow, steady, continual growth over time. And I hope we'll really be able to achieve it. But if we're going to do that, we're going to need to make some strategic changes, and we can be like every other state in the area or in the country, or we can be like the little white blueberry there. And what I was trying to encourage our legislature, our ag committee, was why can't we put some key investments and act on what these farmers have talked about and start to make some real changes. And if we do that, we act on these grower identified things, we can get to go, and we can get started at it. And I think we need to move on this. We don't have as much time as we might have once thought we did, I think. And we had a nice discussion at breakfast that there have been people saying we need to do this for a long, long time, that we need to get people reconnected to an agrarian base and get this going, because changes are coming, and I think they're even more in our face now than they've ever been. And I think the key things that are going to drive this are energy issues. That's a real crapshoot about where it's going to go, and climate and water issues are they're in our face every day. We know things are changing, and conceivably, if things get really dry where we've been producing a lot of our crops, we're going to need to do it where we're going to have water, and we're supposed to have water, so that should be a positive. And the other thing that we really see in this country is a real change in our basic health. In a 20-year period, we've gone from roughly 1 out of 8 people or 1 out of 10 people who were obese now to something closer to 1 out of 3 and 1 out of 4. And I was listening to Warren Hesterman give a presentation, and he said that he had heard from the executive vice president of one of the country's largest healthcare firms that by 2018, the cost of health-related health treatments due to obesity was going to cost something in the order of $375 billion a year. And he said that will bankrupt us, and it's going to bankrupt the country. And I think we all sort of intuitively know, we have some understanding of how this has happened. And part of my thinking is that, back in the late 70s, incomes stagnated, and in the early age when the income stagnated in our country, more people went to work. We got more women in the workforce, which was good. But the problem was, with women working 40 hours a week and 50 to 60 hours a week, and men working 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week, nobody wanted to go home and cook. So we basically outsourced our food for labor, essentially, and so for income. So we we traded income for food, essentially. And in doing that, though, what I think you lose is you lose control over what goes into that food, you lose control over portion size, and worse than that, you lose capacity. So we have a whole, I just taught a class of honors students, and I asked this honors class, I said, I'm going to invite you to my house for dinner. And I'm going to have a chicken sitting on the table, a bag of rice, and a bunch of greens. And I've got a fully equipped kitchen with everything you need right here. How many of you would have the first clue where to start? It was a class of 7 students. 4 of them said, I wouldn't have a clue. 2 of them said, you might be able to eat it. And 1 person said, I'll take your invitation. So and this is honor students, these are our best students. I'm really worried about this. So we've got to connect our kids to food. We've got to reconnect capacity. If we don't, we're in really big trouble. And so I feel really fortunate to work for Cooperative Extension in Maine, and our director is very interested in this whole program, and what he wants to do is he wants to see Maine increase its capacity to produce good quality food, and we're going to try to increase the demand for that by food system education. He wants our organization to be the farm to fork organization for the state. And we're really going to, and I see a great future for me as I continue on there working in this area, because I think it's a really important one. So I've been running around telling people, yes, we need to get real, yes, we do need to get Maine, and we need to get off our butts and get back in the kitchen. That's men and women teaching our kids how to cook and eat better so that we can build this food system that we want to do. And I think our young farmers are really going to be at the forefront of this. So we need to be teaching them how what they're growing is connected to what they should be eating and the value of that, because it is going to be a really important piece in this puzzle to make this work. And I also think that if we grow this food system, we're going to have to want to do it, to think that we could do this and we could double our agricultural capacity or something like that. We're going to be pulling in land that maybe hasn't been in production for a while, or maybe was dropped because it wasn't as productive as other areas. And the tendency for a lot of farmers is to put on more nutrients to make it more fertile or whatever. And we need to approach this from a more proactive standpoint, put in more buffer systems and setbacks so that we can do this and not pollute the water supplies, because the waters that leave those fields enter the bigger rivers and ultimately end up at our Gulf of Maine. And what we were talking about today is this is another potential ace in the hole for us in our regional food system for production purposes, and we don't want to, as we say in Tennessee, pee in the whiskey. So, and right now, we have, Maine system is pretty much right now a lobster-dominated fishery, and we really should be trying to do some efforts to try to rebuild this. And so our hope is that we can do more of this connecting farmers and fishermen to be thinking about how we do this together, how we rebuild the fishery and grow our agriculture in such a way that one doesn't become a deterrent to the other. And there is interest in this in our state, which has been really good. If we don't, this is what's going to happen, and we will be much like every other place in the country that's overgrown and overpopulated. So I'll wrap up with saying that when I was 10 years old, it was all I ever wanted to do. They had pictures of me driving the tractor when I was 5. Our farmers do want to farm. They just want it to happen, and I think it's in the tortoise and hare economic race. I think it is a good solid economy, and it's our way to get at some of our problems and get them solved. And I hope it will lead to some very good things. So that's what I wanted to share with you, and I hope it was enjoyable to you. Thank you.
don't smell pizza yet, so I think we have a few more minutes before we need to adjourn this next door.
Sure.
John, you did not mention intensive rotational grazing or grass farming as an element for dairy production and meat production and so forth, and as a growing phenomenon in Maine, which I know it is a growing phenomenon. And another point relates to processing. The Vermonters are getting very excited about mobile processing, mobile
Yes.
units of one sort or another, even fairly large scale, not just
Yes.
chickens, not just poultry. And I'm wondering if you see either of these, intensive rotational grazing and grass farming on the one hand, and mobile processing on the other, as having the potential to make a real difference in Maine's capacity to produce its own food.
I do. Interestingly, we have some intensive grazing going on. It's been, you have to have I think you need a champion. It's been, and this is based only on my experience, but it seems like in Vermont there was a champion. They really sold. He went out and really promoted the benefits of it, and it really worked in Vermont, and it was done a lot. We tried. I've been in Maine for 20 years, and it's never taken off. We've shown the benefits of it. People have been they've just been reluctant to it. It's a more management intensive system, and they thought, well, if I can just grow the crops and bring it to them, it's a lot easier than chasing down the cows. But there's no question that's got to be. It is our ace, and our capacity to grow grass is our and convert cellulose to protein is our number one best asset in Maine, and it's something we really need to keep pushing, and we need to promote it, and it's got to be part of that system, because it's much tighter. It's a much tighter system than trying to grow corn. It just always is. And I think that mobile processing is a key piece in that overall infrastructure that we need to grow. And if we can get that to happen, I think that would be a tremendous benefit in Maine. Yes.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I had a question because several growers are bringing up, or there was an issue with how to buffer these uncertainties in terms of climate and that kind of thing. And so it's identified broadly as a problem, but we didn't get into solutions identified by growers. And I was just wondering if there was any talk about how, as farms shrink and you're intensifying, one of the great buffers against these uncertainties is diversification. But there's only so much that an individual farmer can do, and it seems that the buffering is happening more at the collective level. And so you mentioned some interesting ideas in terms of land ownership and kind of a different collective model. Was there a discussion at all among farmers of new novel collective ways of thinking about buffering risk?
That's a really good question. We had. It's amazing. It would be neat to see if we could try to tease some of that out through the program. But we had a lot of conversations about the issues, and not so much about how to solve them, and how, other than through diversification, as you mentioned.
But that was always at the individual farm level?
Yes, it was always at the individual farm level. We were always thinking about how can I, and we have one industry that really can't. I mean, it can't buffer itself really at all, because of just the nature of what they grow and how they're growing it. And it's been one of my favorite. I've been tilting at that industry for a long time, to try to look at a different model, because in our potato industry, they grow, most of it's for the potato chip and french fry industry, and they plant as early as they can plant, and they have to follow plow so they can get into there early in the spring, and they grow them until, and they're digging them when the snow's flying, and they're in there every other year, and they're turning that soil 6 or 7 times in a season to some level or another. And it's to me, that's the worst. And we had some of the most highest rainfall last June and July in University County that they've ever had, and they were just gully erosion all over the place, and you just can't imagine that it's not going to happen. So that's sort of one end of the spectrum, right? And what you're talking about is another one where you could take 9 inches of rain on a fully pastured intensive grazing system, and it's going to be okay. I mean, it's not ideal, but you can deal with that. We did have a lot of farmers talking about the more control we can have. The hoop houses, the vegetable growers are all interested in having a certain amount of covered opportunity so they know that they can control things. We had a horrible tomato late blight problem a couple of years ago, and the farmers that were growing their tomatoes in 100 tunnels didn't have the issues, or they had much fewer issues. So that's something that's been identified as a good buffer, and just having a lot of discussion with vegetable growers of just spreading everything that you grow. So if something isn't doing great, we got, because it's too wet or too cold or too hot or too dry, that they got the thing covered. But it's all been at pretty much all of the discussion that we saw was really at the farm level. Yeah, exactly.
John, you have an interesting phenomenon in Maine with the Amish moving in north of Bangor, up near Fulton. And I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to spend some time with them, aside from their draft animal stuff. But it is fascinating what they're doing. And are they engaged in the larger agricultural community, or is Extension engaged with them? I mean, to just go on their operations and see all the things they're doing and the way, and their lifestyle is different, and there's, we're not necessarily about adopting the lifestyle, but their production techniques and their marketing techniques. Is there much engagement in cross-pollination?
That's a really good question. It is increasing. You're absolutely
It's
right.
any place in New England. I guess there's a few Mennonites in Vermont that I know of, but I don't know of others.
Yeah, and down in Thorndike area, there's a good enclave there up in Smyrna in Rosedale County, and they are using Extension. It's interesting because we can do this with them, but I can't show them a video. They don't think
They came to my talk, but I gave it hope. I was surprised that they came in like a van.
But they can ride, but they can't drive. So you just got to figure out how you can work with them. But they're very interested. They've come for pesticide training, and they're I don't know what you do when Chester the horse decides he wants to stop and nibble when they're when you're calibrating your sprayer. But they have some interesting systems that.
On the flip side, do they share, are there open house kind of events or any, sort of open farm things where they would share on the flip side? I mean, they were very willing to share with me as an individual after we met at the talk.
Sure. I haven't had that much. I didn't interact. I didn't have any interaction with them in this program. And I probably should have reached out, actually, more than to see if we could have done something with them, because I think that would have, in retrospect and with hindsight, that's a very astute thing to see. Because I think they will continue to grow with the land they exist there.
The town loves them.
Yeah.
They had abandoned farms with no activity.
Sure. It sure seems stable.
John, I'm working with a group of farmers, processors, chefs, and a group of people in the upper Connecticut River Valley of New Hampshire and Vermont. And they want to create a food systems plan. And in our discussion on Wednesday, they identified a couple of significant barriers. One was distribution. They said one of the barriers to there is a demand for local food and regional food. We can't get it to market efficiently. And related to that, the other barrier was organization. We have individual farmers cultivating their own direct connections, and what they need is some ability to aggregate products and be more efficient in working as a group rather than as individuals. Was that identified or perceived as a barrier?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had farmers call me on the phone and talk to me about, well, I can't make your meeting tomorrow because I got this, but let me tell you, I got one issue. We need to improve distribution. And some farmers talked about, well, what we need is a way when everybody has too much of something to be able to take it someplace and get it down the road, and get it up the road. And that we had some people talk about shouldn't we be funding the Department of Agriculture at a level that reflects what that industry produces in the state. And those people should be the people that are making these connections in our state. And when I talked about that to the ag committee, it's like, this is something we our farmers are saying we need help in this area. And I think that's the group that logically should be there to do some of that, at least help in that. If not, maybe there's an opportunity for private industry to do it. I'd like to think there would be, but they aren't doing it yet. So it seems like it seems like a quasi-governmental industry entity should be helping with that. What do you think, Kurt?
I think one of the disadvantages, I think of it because like all of the large commodities, like there are commodity groups and there are, or all of large commodity group growers get together and do like a cooperative and then they hire people to operate that chain. The problem with small local producers is you've got lots of different crops.
Right.
So if it would somehow potentially be possible just to call it a local food as a commodity, so you combine all of the different foods and come together almost in a cooperative sense that has the capacity to create change, just calling it a local food as a commodity, that's something that's potentially possible. To make it at least somewhat comparable, because a lot of times, yeah, there needs to be enough production and enough demand to actually create that change.
It's true, because certainly we have the potato board and we have
Yeah.
the blueberry industry, and they have people that are helping in this distribution game, but they are bigger and they can make it happen. So I think that's a neat idea.